You've seen the standard Master System, Mega Drive, and Sega CD games by the truckload, but every now and again something odd pops up. What kind of cart and other media variations are there? How much of this unlicensed media is worth talking about? And what the heck is this bit business all about? In this multi-part series, we're going to look over every Sega home console, along with their accompanying physical media formats, some notable releases that were unofficial, and a few interesting imports that are important to retro gamers today. Let's have a look. This is Retro Impressions, and this is part 1 of the series, Sega Systems and Physical Game Formats. Bits and bytes. You've heard the term before, and they might even seem interchangeable, especially when you consider the video game industry used these terms in tandem as the cartridge format was being phased out in favor of the compact disc. However, they are very different in the way they represent data size, and for the purpose of this series, here's a quick lesson. A bit is the most basic measurement of computer data. You know those series of binary numbers you sometimes see in TV shows, movies, and when using a hex editor? Every one of those zeros and ones represent one bit of data, acting as a dip switch of sorts. You can think of this as a light switch represented by off and on, 0 and 1, or high and low. By themselves, they do nothing. But in a series of 8, they can represent things such as a single letter or number. These series of 8 bits are called a byte, meaning that 1 byte is equal to 8 bits. A lot of times you'll see a notation looking like this. When the B is capitalized, it's referring to bytes. When the lowercase b is used, it's referring to bits. In modern times, bits are typically used as a means of measuring communication speed. Internet speed is a prime example of this, as a 50 meg service is in reality just a 6 1/4 megabyte service. Bits often represent actual storage space. That 16 gig phone, that 1 gig thumb drive, or that 700 megabyte compact disc are all represented by bytes. So how do we get to something such as a 4 meg cart from the unit of bit? Well, there's 1024 bits in a kilobit, 1024 kilobits in a megabit, and 1024 megabits in a gigabit. To give you a better idea of what this means in the real world, 8 bits or 1 byte is required for 1 character. 1 kilobyte holds approximately 170 words at an average length of 5 letters per word, or about a half a page of text. 1 megabyte holds approximately 500 pages of text, 1 copy of Jane Eyre, or around 7 seconds of read book CD audio. 1 gigabyte holds approximately 550,000 pages of text, 1,080 copies of Jane Eyre, and 117 minutes of read book CD audio. As a lot of games were represented in bits rather than bytes early on, I'll be providing both of these numbers when it seems appropriate throughout this series. With that out of the way, let's discuss a few quick topics before closing out this Prelude episode. So, what exactly was Sega referring to when they touted the mega power of their games? This dates back to the Master System. Every early release cart-based game was contained on a 1 meg cartridge, and Sega advertises proudly on the front of the game's box. With the release of the first 2 meg cart, the wording was changed to twice the mega power. They would shift the wording back to stating the specific ROM size used with the release of the 4 meg cart. Still, this term stuck, and in large part due to Joe from GameSack, has remained a relevant term today. Talking about cartridge size and hardware capability would be something heavily used by Sega's marketing team, becoming a heavy influence in the landscape of how games and their respective systems would be sold to customers for years to come. So what about blast processing? When the Genesis launched in North America in 1989, it was pushed by a marketing campaign that touted its ability to bring the arcade games home.
So if you want real arcade action, there's only 2 ways to get it.
Dave, we got your golden axe.
Or get Genesis by Sega. We bring the arcade experience home.
Sega had a dominating lead as their main rival was the NES, a system that didn't really stand comparable to what the Genesis was trying to do. By August of 1991, Nintendo had a new challenger with the release of the Super Nintendo. It was an absolute juggernaut, selling 2 million consoles in 1991 in comparison to the 1.6 million Genesis. Sega's marketing team would change focus and take direct aim at Nintendo's new console by touting their larger library along with the speed of the system, while pointing out their lower price point. The vibe of the ads also changed by injecting an in-your-face attitude in what could be considered the beginning of the Attitude Era of gaming.
Forgot what I was gonna say.
Welcome to the next level.
During this time, Sega conducted research finding 40% of their core audience were adults, so a push was made to advance the perception of the Genesis being a system adults and cool kids owned, while framing the Super Nintendo as the system children and out-of-touch grandparents preferred. Nintendo stuck to what it had been doing with most of their marketing targeting young kids, while not really engaging Sega as a serious threat. When Sony's marketing department ran focus groups to see how teenagers perceived each console, they discovered teenage boys who owned a Super Nintendo would seldom admit it.
I see. What else do they say?
That it has 3D graphics and digital stereo sound, and that Super Mario World is included.
Sega's marketing strategy was working, and in 1992 they kept the race competitive while maintaining their lead due to a 2-year head start and the added install base that gave them. Sega also had their new CD add-on releasing near the end of the year, and as part of this, Scott Bayless met with their marketing department to discuss the new console in preparation of its launch.
So, during the run-up to the Western launch of the Sega CD, the PR guys interviewed me about what made the platform interesting from a technical standpoint, and somewhere in there, I mentioned the fact that you could just blast data into the DACs. Well, they loved the word blast, and the next thing I knew, blast processing was born.
The Sega Genesis has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't. So what's blast processing do? And what if you don't have blast processing?
Eventually, Nintendo would shift how it presented its system, recognizing Sega as a direct competitor, and 2 years after the term blast processing was coined, Nintendo struck back with a scathing advertorial titled "Smashing the Myth About Speed and Power." The piece came across as an article written by the magazines they were published in, having the word advertisement in very small print, with no mention that the article had indeed been written by Nintendo. The article took direct aim at blast processing, calling it a blast of hot air and painting Sega as dishonest in their advertisements. There were numerous other falsehoods and assertions, such as the accusation that Sega relied on speed because their games were shallow and without replayability. There was also a list containing things that the Super Nintendo either was only capable of accomplishing or was better at than the Genesis. The problem once again is that this list, along with the majority of the advertorial, pushed damaging falsehoods. The Genesis was capable of scaling and rotation and was indeed faster in many departments. It had a faster processor, a wider internal and external data bus, faster RAM bandwidth, and a faster DMA controller. It was also capable of higher quality sound. So again, we come back to what was blast processing. It's a reference to the capability of the Genesis custom DMA controller for its Yamaha video display processor. It allowed the Genesis to do things it didn't have dedicated hardware for, such as scaling, rotation, increase the active on-screen colors, along with a lot more. In short, the Genesis could do things the SNES required additional onboard hardware for, or required certain cards that contain enhancement chips to achieve what the Genesis was already doing. By the end, the Super Nintendo would have over 75 games released on the system that utilized enhancement chips, most of which were not advertised, leading customers to believe that the system was more powerful than it really was. These included some of their largest titles, including Super Mario World 2, Doom, and Mario Kart. Sega, on the other hand, would release just one game containing an enhancement chip called the SVP. This game was virtual racing. In the end, both the Super Nintendo and the Genesis offered gamers incredible libraries, and their battle for market share is extremely interesting. A whole series could be dedicated to the console wars and the ad campaigns that resulted from them. Join me in part 2 of this mega multi-part series as we step back to look at the history of Sega from their foundation through to the Master System. Thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a positive or negative comment letting me know your thoughts. Click subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Until next time, I'm Jenovi, and this has been Retro Impressions and Reviews.